Remember that one episode of SpongeBob where Squidward says he hates Krabby Patties and SpongeBob is like, no, try them. You'll love it. And he does, and then he becomes obsessed with them. Yeah, do you remember this scene? This is like a vivid memory in my mind, but apparently at one point in our lives, they ended up re-editing the episode to cut the scene out because it was too violent for Nickelodeon. Weird. Anyways, I was wrong about something. The Legend of Zelda, pound for pound, might be one of my top 3 favorite series of all time. I know, very original of me, but growing up with Nintendo consoles up through the Wii, and not having games like Halo or GTA to become obsessed with, the Legend of Zelda series sparked creativity and imagination in my mind as a fan of a world. And a lot of that is thanks to Twilight Princess. Twilight Princess is a game that meant so much to me, and it still does today. Not only was it a mature game for me to wrap myself in when I was only listening to Green Day and Paramore, like I ever stopped doing that, it also featured a rich world that I could explore outside of the game itself. The Wii era, but mainly Twilight Princess and Super Smash Bros. Brawl, were my big introductions to gaming YouTube back in the day. I would spend hours looking up Brawl roster rumors, watching Zelda videos, learning about the old titles of the series, and one thing that changed me forever. And I am not talking about the Midna fan art. Maybe that first, and then this. The soldier that trains the hero of Twilight in the etheric dream world in different sword arts was actually the hero of time? The Link we play in Ocarina of Time in Majora's Mask? How could that be possible? To my knowledge, at the time at least, every Zelda game was just a new take on the world in an art style, plot points, and mechanics that were unique to each iteration, but always the same story. Distinct versions of our characters. The concept of a continuum was earth-shattering. To be honest, I didn't care. Like, the hero of time becoming this old, decrepit warrior who died a bloody, violent death unknown to the world on this random battlefield, only to become the spirit that will train his successor, the next wielder of the Triforce of Courage. It's fucking badass. But besides that, I just didn't care. The idea of a timeline was cool, but I never pursued it or really had any means to play the Zelda games that came out before Wind Waker at the time. Skyward Sword broke new ground on the timeline front by existing as an origin point for the entire series, acting as the reason for numerous retellings and the cyclical nature of the heroes of the Triforce and their struggle against evil. It brought the idea of a timeline to the forefront. Skyward Sword was the Twilight Princess follow-up, and despite Twilight Princess being my favorite game of all time for a good stretch, mix the late 2000s recession and being bullied out of the Nintendo fandom together, and well, let's just say I'm playing Skyward Sword for the first time with this remaster. Maybe me missing out on Skyward Sword and the confirmation of a timeline at that point is the reason I never cared for it beyond my mind-blowing discovery of the hero of time in Twilight Princess. But from my years of listening to podcasts existing on Twitter, YouTube, and forums, there's plenty of fans who think the timeline is bullshit. And even still, I'm not fully convinced of its reliability, and the fact that Aonuma said Breath of the Wild takes place so far removed from anything we've seen so far, it makes the timeline irrelevant. I thought we were moving past it, and good riddance. But, y'all see that Breath of the Wild 2 trailer. Time to put my Zelda encyclopedia to good use. Any use. The Breath of the Wild 2 trailer at E3 2021 was brief, but it's showing some major implications about its setting, mainly that elements, themes, and potentially story is going to be plucked from Skyward Sword and reiterated or expanded upon here. Sky Islands, egg lamps, the fact that this game's title is a spoiler? How do you spoil something that hasn't even released yet unless it's a long-running series that has a follow-up tying into directly an already existing work that the fans know so well? Did you hear that? It's as if millions of voices sighed out a collective shit, realizing they had to pre-order Skyward Sword this month. People much more knowledgeable about the intricacies of the Zelda timeline made quick connections to genuine Skyward Sword story beats beyond Link pulling a Tom Petty. Connections to Ganondorf, his corruption from Demise, and a laundry list of other things make me fully believe that Breath of the Wild 2 is simultaneously some form of a sequel and prequel to both Skyward Sword and Breath of the Wild. What's weird is that they definitely didn't need to do this. Like, I know I'm not alone in this, but when I saw the direction of that recent trailer, I loved it, but I was very surprised. This is not what I expected out of this sequel. And it's wild because just 5 weeks ago, when I was writing the titles and pitches for every episode of this show, when I wrote the Zelda one, the title, just 5 weeks ago, was Breath of the Wild Killed the Zelda Timeline, and that's a good thing. Who'da thunk? This really is a genius play. Breath of the Wild is the end of the timeline and Skyward Sword is the beginning, making a follow-up to the best-selling Zelda in history that can bridge the gap between these two extremes and allow for some revisionist history on the reception of Skyward Sword is a level of marketing and directing gymnastics that really deserve 10s across the board, conceptually at least. So why does this excite me when a matter of days ago, I was glad that the timeline was seemingly irrelevant? Well, honestly, it makes speculation about my most anticipated game right now way more fun. Plus, having never played Skyward Sword and already having planned on picking it up in July, having another reason to be excited for that playthrough just makes it all the better. For all the hate it gets, and for the fans that truly love Skyward Sword, I wouldn't be surprised if it's secretly the best Zelda, just bogged down by some of the circumstances around its release. And I know saying that is a little, maybe a bit of a hot take, but for me personally, Skyward Sword is going to have a hard time overcoming the real best Zelda game, Twilight Princess. But we'll just have to wait and see. My feelings on the Zelda timeline changed a lot real quick, so I won't be surprised if the internet has a similar change of mind about the game. And as we continue to build towards the release of Skyward Sword's sequel, I mean Breath of the Wild 2, sometime in 2022 or potentially 2023, I think there's going to be more and more people showing up for Skyward Sword to defend it and praise it than ever before. And it's because of this stupid timeline. And out of obligation, I feel I must continue the trend of this show using food to really wrap up my metaphor in a nice, succinct way. So, the Zelda timeline, and Skyward Sword, for that matter, are like tomatoes. You know, you get a little taste of it as a kid, you get ketchup, and you're like, this is good. I want more of this. And then you seek out more of it, and you realize that this produce in your mind that is so juicy and succulent is actually just a disgusting ball of mush that's being held together by good faith and prayers and a support group that just really loves this thing. And then, you know, like, you grow up and you realize they're not bad.
You know what? I really don't know.